Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sasha and today we are doing a book related video. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so if you clicked on this and didn't know what you were getting into and you don't want to stay, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for clicking, thanks for being here. If you are interested in book related things, hi friends! Today we're going to go over all of the books that I read in 2022. I read just over 50 books last year, which 50 books is always my goal. I don't always hit it, I don't always come close, but I did succeed last year, which is very exciting. I'm already off to the races this year and have finished one book and will be starting book 2 tonight, but we're not here to talk about that. I do hope that this coming year, this year that we're in now, I'm able to be more consistent with my book reviews here on my YouTube channel, in addition to my reading blog and starting this year my Instagram account. So I'm trying to be more well-rounded. Again, my word of the year is consistency. So instead of coming to you at the end of the year telling you everything I read, I'm hoping that like once a month I can come do a check-in and be like, here's what I read, and we can chat about it. Okay, I'm gonna try and give just like a quick rundown of each book, not even necessarily a synopsis unless I feel like it's warranted. Some books are part of a series, so I'll probably just go over the first book in that series and then the rest you can find out on your own. I did update my reading journal. That is a video I have up on the channel already. I am also going to try and keep my personal reading journal this year more consistent because I did 11 months in one day, which is not the goal, but at least it's finished, so it'll help me. I have a spreadsheet, I have my reading journal, like we're raring to go. So the first book I read last year was The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. JLA has been a favorite author of mine since I was in high school. I've been reading her work for a very long time. Sometimes her writing can be a bit of a turnoff for me personally because it can be a little bit immature in terms of the characters' ages versus their dialogue and conversations. But sometimes it's just like, it's so addictive that I don't care, and I just keep reading it anyway. I gave this book 5 stars. This was a book in a series. Which book number is it? It's book number 3 in the series, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it other than to say the series has the chosen one trope, hidden identities, vampires, gods, goddesses, god of death, god of life, all fun things. And it's a really addicting series. It's definitely an adult series. It's not young adult, quite explicit, very smutty. Really like it. The second book I read was me discovering reverse harem for the first time. And it was Within Obsession and Lies by Stacey Jones and Harper Wilde. I gave this one 4 stars. Let's read what I wrote because I don't quite remember. I said, this was my first reverse harem. The main character has isolated herself her entire life because people become obsessed with her. She feels lured out. Ooh, my handwriting. And meets supernatural men, 3 of them, who are fays, a mafia boss, a psychopath, and a bodyguard. She is their mate, and with the help of them, begins to understand her magic. 10 out of 10 spice level. So this is a book that is definitely a little more on the cringe side if you're more of a like posh reader who's really interested in the writing and all of that kind of stuff. I will say this book stayed in my brain all year long and I couldn't get it out of my head. And the second book got released later in the year and I immediately went and read it because I just couldn't wait to see what else the characters got up to. They were just living rent free and I couldn't get them out of there. So cool magic, really interesting personalities, very different personalities, and I enjoyed it. Next, was a book called Lone Wolf by Sam Hale. This was another paranormal romance reverse harem situation. I gave this one 4 stars, and I really just liked the simplicity of, it's about werewolves, so I like the simplicity of the wolf pack, and that sort of storyline. There is a killer cliffhanger at the end of this book, and I almost wish it could be used as a standalone, because I was totally happy to leave it where it was. But then with the cliffhanger, I did end up getting the second book and just reading far enough to find out how it resolved itself and then dropping off. So I don't know. I think it would have been better if it didn't have the cliffhanger. Moving on. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorite series. It's Dark Shores by Danielle L. Jensen. This is my series that I recommend to all ATeenie out there. If you like ATs, you should be reading this, because the first book in the series starts off with a pirate princess who's sort of coerced and kidnapped by a soldier and forced to take him to the other side of the world that he didn't know existed, and they are on a quest to conquer all of the world. So there's a corrupt kingdom and corrupt politics. There's interesting magic and gods and goddesses, and there's a little romance sprinkled in. Each book, the first book is 2 points of view. The second book are 2 different characters' points of view. The third book is all 4 characters' points of view, and I ate that up. I loved it. So good. It's so good. Please go read it. We're moving back to Jennifer L. Armentrout with Shadow in the Ember. This was another paranormal romance. Oh, this is the prequel series to the series I was telling you about earlier. I don't think you have to read the other series first. I think you could read the prequel first and be fine. Neither series is complete, so there's that. This prequel follows the god of death and his meant to be consort or wife or mate or whatever, and it's another like chosen one trope. I loved these characters a little bit more than I like the main characters in the main series, and I just have something with gods of death as characters and seeing their like fluffy side and seeing their killing everyone and everything but within reason side, you know? So that's why I was so addicted. And there are dragons in it, and I was just like, oh, give me the dragons. So I really like this one even more. Next up, I did the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. This is a young adult fantasy series that came out quite a few years ago. Holly Black is such a popular author right now in mainstream media. She has so many books that are out, have come out. This series is a trilogy. It's about 2 human girls who live in the fairy lands and how cruel and gruesome the fae actually are. I think that for me was the most interesting take, was that I've read so many novels where fae are just like cool and have cool powers, and yeah, they can kind of be scary sometimes and they murder people and don't care, but this book was not that. This was like they hate humans. They want to sometimes eat them, and they look very scary. And it was just so interesting that it was a book marketed towards young adults, and that was the take. Whereas the books marketed towards actual adults, it's a little more fluffy sometimes. I don't know, it was very interesting. My only downfall is that I'd seen so many spoilers and so much fan art for this series that by the time I actually read it, I already knew who the like end goal couple was, and I wasn't as thrilled or as taken with it as people who read this for the first time and had no idea going in. So I didn't have the best experience, but it was still worth reading for the story and the writing and the setting. Like, I can still so vividly picture that world, and it was that I appreciate. All right, next I discovered Katie Robert for the first time. Wow, if you don't know who she is a romance author for adults. Capital adults. I started with Neon Gods and Electric Idol. Those were so good. That's a new take on the gods and goddesses of Olympus. The first book follows Hades and Persephone. The second book follows Psyche and Eros. I really liked Hades and Persephone's story because, once again, god of the underworld, god of the dead. I'm obsessed. He has puppies. Like, yes, sign me up. But her books also heavily deal with themes of BDSM or kinks and things that you don't always find in mainstream romance. And I was sort of on a path last year in my reading where I started with reverse harem, and then I sort of went into kink, and then I sort of went back to vanilla, and we'll get to that in a minute. But it was just very much the year of challenging my reading tastes when it came to romance and trying so many different new things. And I thought Katie Robert was going to be my forever favorite new author until I started reading Desperate Measures, which is her Villains series. So in her Villains series, she sort of turns our Disney childhood characters into just very sexual people and characters. And the first one is Jasmine and Jafar. And I personally found that book extremely triggering, and I couldn't enjoy it. I had anxiety the whole way through, and it brought up a lot of negative things for me. So there are certain aspects of her writing, whereas that is perfect for someone looking for some things that aren't discussed in the day-to-day life unless you're in the kink or BDSM community. It's like she's your niche writer. Whereas for me, there are certain aspects of that community that can be really harmful, and I didn't know how harmful until I read the book. So once again, I was exploring, I was trying new things with my reading, and it turns out that that wasn't for me. But I didn't solidify it until I read 3 more of those books. So I also read Learn My Lesson and A Worthy Opponent. Learn My Lesson is Meg, Hercules, and Hades. That was less triggering, and Hercules was such just like a puppy character that it was a little bit soothing. And then the last book was Hook and Tink, and I did feel a little trapped and a little more anxiety in that one again. And that was when I decided this series isn't for me anymore. In between that, I was able to break it up with some fluffy romance, and that's when I discovered Elle Kennedy. So Elle Kennedy has a really cool series. She has 2 of them, and I'm trying to read if it says on here what the first one is called. So the first book is called The Deal by Elle Kennedy, and it's a hockey romance. Oh man, I devoured these. So there's the hockey romance series that starts with The Deal, and then there's a spin-off of similar characters but a few years later. So it's like the next group of college students coming in, and that is called Briar U, and that starts with The Chase. And I'm pretty sure I read every book in that series and just fell in love with these little small town kids. And well, they weren't kids, they were college aged. I would say these books are new adult. They're definitely explicit. They can deal with some triggering issues such as suicide, rape, parental alcoholism, parental physical and emotional abuse. I'd say almost every book has one main, not necessarily controversial topic, but please read some reviews or trigger warnings before picking these up, because if you can get through those parts of the book, the rest of it is just such sweet, cuddly, amazing chemistry and romance and swoon-worthy, and I ate these up. I was reading like 1 a day at some point. It was nuts. It was wild. Okay, so after all the Katie Robert and the Elle Kennedy, we went back to Jennifer L. Armentrout. It was The War of Two Queens, which is a continuation. It was the 4th book in that main series that I was telling you about in the beginning. So we've kind of already talked about it. I gave it 5 stars. I was very happy. A lot of other people who were reading this series at the time were not happy with this book, and I could see why, but I loved it. So that's my review. I went back to Elle Kennedy with 1 more of her books called The Risk, And then I tried something else new because I was still in my Hades Persephone's era. I tried A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. A lot of people had mixed reviews when I was looking up which Hades Persephone's book to try next. Some people said this was great, some people said don't do it, it'll ruin it for you. And I can see both sides because I thought this had a lot of potential. I really liked the plot overall. I did not enjoy the writing. I didn't feel like there was enough world building. We kind of just blinked and we're at the next scene or at the next location. There was too much dialogue and not enough happening. The chemistry between Hades and Persephone was there. I was rooting for them, but I didn't have it in me. I skimmed probably 200 pages just to see how it ended. And yeah, it was a big disappointment for me because she has so many series out right now. Maybe not so many, maybe like 2 or 3 that I wanted to try. And after this first book, I don't think I would go back to her writing again. That's not to say that other people won't like it, but I did not. I read another Elle Kennedy book, the play, still in my hockey romance era. And then I read my biggest book, I'm pretty sure, of the year, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I cataloged this as an epic fantasy. It took about 300 pages before I felt any actual excitement about what was going on and curiosity about how it was going to unfold and what was going to happen next. So this series is a fantasy series where dragons still exist, but there are 2 camps. There's the camp that thinks dragons are to be worshipped and only the select chosen humans are allowed to have a partner dragon and sort of ride them and train with them and fight on the backs of the dragons. There's the other camp that thinks all dragons should be killed, they're evil, they're going to bring about the end of the world. And there is an evil clan of dragons who is trying to sort of end the world, and there's a queen, and there's her whole history and the prophecy surrounding her heritage and bloodline. Listen, the other thing that this should have had going for it was that it was multiple points of view, and I'm going to have to cut that out. I love multiple points of view. You can sell me on a book if it has multiple points of view. However, I only really liked one of the points of view, so having to read the other characters that I didn't like, one of them I openly disliked and hated every time I got to one of his sections, to the point where I would put the book down and not come back to it for weeks at a time. Until one week I was like, I'm gonna have to read an hour of this every day until it's done. So that made it more of a chore than it was enjoyable. I felt it was way too long. And it's like the writing and the world building was good, but it was too much. So that's my review on that one. Probably a little controversial. Next up, I read a book for review. Thank you to Readsy Discovery. I'm a reviewer over on that website. I don't know that I have my link down below, but I'll add it for this video. I read Emma Bean the Mouse by Stephen Wood. This is a junior fiction fantasy novel. I said I really love seeing the world as animals and viewing humans as animals. We had great adventures with so many characters. We were seeing the world through the eyes of a young mouse, as well as her family and some other animals. There were also humans involved in the story as knights, because everyone once again is trying to go after this dragon and this evil like warlock wizard guy. The adventures we were going on was really fun and really enjoyable, and I could absolutely see how a child reading this would just love this story. Each chapter was its own little mini story, which is great for the attention spans. The only problem I had was there were possibly too many names of either places or characters, to the point where at some parts of the book, and I did talk to the author about this after I posted my review, there were characters whose names were switched. So if they were trying to say like, Sarah did this to John, it would be John did this to Sarah, but it's like, that's not, you flip-flopped. So there's some editing that needs to be done to this book, but I think kids would absolutely like it and parents would have a good time reading it too with their kids. So I gave it 3 stars. Also, from Readsy Discovery, I picked up Hot Rod Hookups, which turned out to be an amazing new adult romance. I was not expecting to like this as much as I did at all. I picked it up because romance is so easy and fast for me to read that I knew I could read it and get my review out and bing, bang, boom, get it done. So I picked it up and then ended up loving it. It was about a small town and this girl's a bartender and she has a boyfriend who's in college. They're both in college, I think. And he's like on the baseball team or something, but he's kind of a jerk. And there's this regular that comes in and they're good friends. And then he ends up getting this car from his family, I believe. And she works at her father's mechanic shop and is the only one who's able to fix it for him. And, you know, lo and behold, they go from friends to more. It was just so cute. There were really strong family bonds and family scenes and moments in this. And there was an interesting discussion on purity culture almost. And I enjoyed it. I liked what the book was trying to say. This was book 2 in a series, but both could be total standalone novels. So the only sort of playing catch up I was doing was like the characters all already knew each other and I didn't know anyone. So I was going in a little blind, but it was not hard to pick it up and keep moving through. Another book from Readsy Discovery I picked up was a children's fiction novel. Not so much novel, it was actually more like a picture book than anything else. It was called Lucy and Mother Maple. This was a really interesting story about human greed versus compassion for the nature and all living things around us. The illustrations themselves were so whimsical and beautiful and sort of heartbreaking to go along with the story, but it felt like the writing didn't match the illustrations quite enough. The writing was more analytical and less fairy tale story-esque, and that was really my only complaint there. But I did enjoy it. We went back to Katie Robert with a book called Wicked Beauty. This was book 3 in the series I was talking about earlier, not the Disney villain series, the Olympus series. This one was Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. Very interesting trio of characters we had here. I think I was, for this one, more interested in the actual plot and the trials that were happening and less interested in the sexy times, which was weird, but that is how I felt, and that's what I wrote down. So it still got 4 stars because it kept my interest enough, and I am sort of intrigued in the political atmosphere that's happening now because of how this book ended. So interested to see what the next one will do and what will happen. Up next, another Readsy Discovery novel that I read for review was Divinity and Ruin by Ellery Rose. This I categorized as paranormal romance, again, more of an adult romance. This is becoming a reverse harem. It's not fully developed in this first novel. I said it was a super quick read. It has potential, but writing is a bit weak. It's a reverse harem with gods, goddesses, demons, etc. So our story starts off with our main character sort of getting murdered and the gods and goddesses coming to intervene and rescue her and take her into their world, as it were, and why people are trying to come after her. They're unraveling this mystery of who she is, what magic she has, and I thought it was compelling how the author made the reverse harem the aspect or plot point in the book, because it wasn't just fated mates, but it was more of a magical occurrence. And that was something I hadn't read yet, so I thought that was cool. I think this has potential to be a really interesting story, but it just needs to be polished up a little bit and edited more. Next up was book 2 of the Stacey Jones and Harper Wilde series. This one's called Through Illusions and Deceit. I said, it's so crazy, wild, bad, it's good, ? Because that's exactly how I feel about it. I'm so addicted to it, but it's so outlandish, and I just don't care. And I liked it again. I liked it once again. This one had almost a little bit more of a domestication to it, where the first one you're learning who everyone is, and it's all like secrets and unraveling who's who and blah 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 blah. This one was more like we know everyone, and now we're getting comfortable with everyone. And then, oh, also, by the way, people are trying to kill people, and the fae and the magic, and like she's trying to tame her magic, and it's exploding everywhere, and that was cool to watch. So I still like it. I'm still invested. Next, I got another book from Readsy Discovery. I was only meant to read one book, but then I clicked on it, and sometimes they don't mention when you take them how many books it is in a series, and the book I selected was book number 4. And I had enough time that I was like, well, if I'm going to do this review justice, I'm going to review and read books 1, 2, and 3 as well. So I started Carrie Thorne's series that starts with the book called 6. It's 6, then Wildest, then Changed, then Echo. All of these are paranormal romance. I'm going to talk about all of them as quickly as possible. So in the first book, 6, we're dealing with 2 demon hunters. One of them is working sort of for the US Navy or Coast Guard, and they are a specific unit that the other Coast Guards don't really know about, and they're hunting these demons and predators and things, and he helps them do that. And then one day, this human woman ends up in the middle of the ocean wherever they are, and he brings her on the board the ship and discovers, oh, she's also a demon hunter like me. And she has amnesia, can't remember anything. It's close proximity because they are in the same little room on the boat together or whatever. And yeah, just watching them sort of kindle something together and discover more about each other they've never met before was nice and cool. The next book, each book is a different member of her team. So the next book is one of her friends who goes on a mission to infiltrate werewolves. Oh my god, I love werewolves. And it was very much a quintessential werewolf. Here's the pack dynamic happening. And there turns out to be 2 different types of werewolves, which the hunters didn't actually know before now, because this is the first time they've ever been invited to stay with the kind werewolves. I don't know, I think this one might have been my favorite now that I've read all 4. After that, we went into Changed. Changed, I was on a tight schedule because I was almost running out of time to get to the 4th book. Changed deals very heavily with vampires, and I'm going to leave it at that because otherwise it's a spoiler. The last book deals with one of the hunters, one of the female cousin of the first main character. She has to work with a team called Echo in the military who are like off, they're not listed, they don't exist basically, and it's her and this military guy falling in love, and at the same time trying to kill this creature overseas that's killing off all these other military people who are on an op, and they're like, is it our enemy? Did our enemy team up with a demon or something? I don't know. It was cool. It was a good enough story. The steam between the 2 of them saved it for me. That was worth reading because I was like, I want to know more, because she is more powerful than him, and that is a dynamic I love. At the same time, another Readsy Discovery book I read was a middle grade chapter book called A Quest of Cats and Vases, or Vases, by Chad Redder-Rath. Oh boy, I'm so sorry if I messed up that name. This was a cute little story. I have to say though, so it starts off as a chosen one trope, but the chosen one dies right away. Like first page, boom, he's dead. So then his little brother, who was never trained to do anything, never meant to do anything, has to go on this quest instead. And he meets along the way a sidekick character who I cannot describe any other way than Jar Jar Binks as a cat. And it's literally just that back and forth between the two of them as they go on all of these different quests, do all of this different stuff. And I wish we had learned more about the magic in this book, but I did think the writing was good, so I did enjoy it. I also this year read Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith, or Smythe, I'm not sure how they pronounce their name. Totally obsessed. My whole page is just me being upset. Hold on. Me being obsessed with it. I love it. 1,000 stars. Yes. I did read it on Webtoon. I don't have the physical copies. It's, once again, Persephone's and Hades, except this is exactly what I wanted. There were a few triggering scenes in this book, but I think the way, it's not totally resolved yet, but I think the way it is resolving itself was very healing for me. I did a lot of crying while reading this, but it wasn't like, it was much different than the Katie Roberts scenario, whereas this, I was healing with the character instead of living through it with that character. So this is my niche. This is what I can handle, and I love it. I'm behind. I haven't read it since August, so anything new that's come out since then, I'm behind. But I like to binge it, so that's okay anyway. Oh my gosh, next, thank you Readsy Discovery. I read a memoir. It was my only memoir of the year. I don't typically go for memoirs unless they're like a celebrity I'm interested in or just something that sounded interesting. And I kept seeing this pop up in the library of books we had to choose from for review, and it just stuck with me. There was something about it. This is about a woman whose husband passes away and she becomes a widow. And it is her journey moving through her grief of her husband's death, and a lot of feeling like, did she do enough for him? Did she do enough in her life with him? And how to move on from that. And I was so captivated by this story because even though I haven't experienced death like that, I'm not married, I've never been married, there was so much of her as a person that I connected with. And gosh, it's a book I really think every young woman or woman in their late 20s, early 30s should read something like this. Because the main lesson I sort of took away, and I almost hesitate to say it out loud because I don't want to put these words in the author's mouth. I'm not saying this is what I think she was trying to tell the reader. This is what I took away from it as the reader. So don't go thinking that this was like what she said. But my main takeaway from this series as a reader is that it can oftentimes be better to stay alone and to stay single and to sit in that loneliness and learn how to accept it and how to cope with it. And it can also be safer mentally, physically, emotionally than to jump from relationship to try and fill a void or a hole. Because there were a few situations that the author got herself into, or I can't even necessarily say got herself into because the other party a lot of times was at fault, that could have been avoided if you learn to be alone. But you have to also go through those steps sometimes. You can hear about it and be like, yeah, that's great, whatever. There's a big difference between hearing about something and experiencing it. And I think it's because I've already experienced some of the bad relationships that I am just like, alone. So yeah, anyway, I just thought it was such a beautiful book. I gave it 5 stars. All right, next up, I did my yearly reread of A Court and Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I read Thorns and Roses, Mist and Fury, Wings and Ruin, and Silver Flames all in one. If you haven't read it before, it's about fae and fairies, and it's not young adult, it's adult. It's romance. There's a war happening in the 2nd and 3rd books. It's great. You should read it. It's my favorite. I named my Etsy shop after this series, and I reread it every year. So there's that. Next up was another reread. I reread A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. That means I read it twice this year, but that's because the second book, A Light in the Flame, came out. And hold on, I'll find it. This second book in the series was pretty interesting. It talked a lot about panic attacks and mental health, and the chemistry between our two characters was like off the charts. Yeah, there's a few scenes. Like the first book, there's one scene that sticks out, is imprinted on my brain. The second book, there's one scene imprinted on my brain forever. And I don't know how she does it, but they're there and they live rent free. So again, I'm not going to say too much. This is the prequel series. This was book 2. Next up, I read my one World War II book of the year. This one was The Lovely War by Julie Berry. It turns out that this book wasn't actually centered around World War II as much as I thought it was. It was much more World War I, which was fascinating because I've never, to my knowledge, read any sort of book or novel that's centered around this war. So the way it's set up is there's some fantasy elements, but very few. You have the gods and goddesses in a hotel room retelling as if they're like on trial, sort of. This is their evidence. They're living, the gods and goddesses right now are living through World War II, but they're retelling evidence from World War I to satisfy their case of are they guilty or innocent of X, because that's the plot. I can't tell you that. And so we follow two main couples through the trial who are human, and it was just so raw and emotional and heartbreaking. And it touched on really great topics. The author really dove deep into Black American soldiers and what that experience was like, both in America and when they came overseas. And some of the stuff was sickening to read. So definitely trigger warnings there if that's something you choose not to read about or you think will be too hurtful to read about. Totally get it, because it was rough. There were moments where I had to just put the book down and do something else. I had a good amount of anxiety while reading this book because it's a book about war, so people are gonna die, and I just didn't know who it would be. And by the time the people needed to die, I was very attached to everyone. So, however, I don't think it's a book that will stick with me quite enough. I only gave it 3 stars. And I feel like while the writing was perfect, beautiful, amazing, the story, great, what I give a 4 or 5 star book is the way it makes me feel. And that's maybe not super objective as a reviewer, but it's my review. So that's how I rate it. And this one made me feel not great things, and I don't think it's a story that's gonna live in my brain the same way like a fairy smut book did. So maybe that's a me problem, but that's where we are. Next up, I read a book called Raise the Dead, also for review from Reedsy Discovery. Thank you so much to Reedsy for the arc. It was by Tony Fuentes and C.S. Cadding. I hope that's right. This was an interesting premise, and I was so excited. This book revolved around a necromancer. Once again, people dealing with dead things. I don't know, because death really scares me, so here I am just reading about it all the time. But it was a necromancer and a murdered queen, and their sort of journey to solving her murder. He had to go through a lot of different trials with her and different experiences. There were some cool aspects about how necromancy in this novel works and how it's tied to a magic system and how there is so much prejudice against his group of people and people like him. And I wish that had been expanded on. I wished his education history and like his schooling had been expanded on. At the very end of the book was a drawn piece of parchment paper that looked like it was from an old textbook that had some necromancy text on it. I wish they had done that at the beginning of every chapter. Give us a little snippet of a necromancy textbook for every chapter, and I would have loved it. This was also supposed to be a romance, and I very much got friend zone vibes. So there were like touches and glances and whispers in the ear, and there was everything that should have been there except the chemistry for me. So I don't know. I don't know. Because this is definitely the first in a series based on how it ended. I think the characters need more time to grow together. That's where I'm leaving that. Next, I read Nora, a Tenebris Desire novel by Gia Kobe. Again, from Readsy Discovery. Thank you so much for the arc. This is a vampire book. This is a vampire paranormal romance book, and my review of it is not the best. It's a little harsh. I think this book should have been split into 3 prequels because there are 3 very distinct sections when you're reading it. The first one would have gotten a 5-star rating from me because it was the absolute best thing I've read recently. Well, that was before I read some of my other stuff after, but it was just so sweet. There's this human guy who's meeting this girl who's a vampire. He doesn't know that. She doesn't tell him. They fall in love. It's the story of watching them go on dates together, of watching them be totally normal, and it was amazing. I loved that. I ate it up. However, as the story continues, he becomes a little bit of a red flag for me. I don't know if this is my bitter bias coming out, but he went from like sweet and overprotective to giving me the ick and treating her like she's inferior, like she couldn't make her own decisions, like she couldn't protect herself. And there was a guy coming after her and hunting her. But at the same time, like, she was a vampire, dude. Like, come on now. She's faster than you. She's stronger than you. You don't need to pull her arm to get her away or to do something. So that started to bother me. And then they started to be saying in every sentence at the end or beginning, I love you so much. And I was just like, oh my God, stop. It went from sweet to sickly sweet. And it was too much for me. I don't want to be mean about this book because overall, there are people who are going to really like it and really enjoy it. And that's totally fine. I totally get it. It just wasn't for me. I almost need more of a back and forth dynamic with sass and not just like, oh my God, I love you. Oh my God, I love you too. Oh my God, we're so in love. I was like, eh. But that's a me thing. So there are people out there who will really like this. And the vampire lore behind it, cool. Like, good concept. Enjoyed it. And it left enough that the rest of the series or whatever it's going to become is going to be interesting. So yeah, people will like it. It's just, it wasn't me, fam. Anyway, the next 2 books, well, actually the rest of the books on this list, 3 more books, we're almost there. My throat hurts. Okay. The next 2 books are 2 books in a series from Readsy Discovery. Again, thank you so much. And the first book was Spring Song by Cassia Hall. The second book is Summer Lights by Cassia Hall. So I picked up the review for Summer Lights. Again, didn't realize it was book 2. Saw when I downloaded it there were 2 books, so I started reading the first one. I didn't know until after I read the entire first book and started to write my review that that book was a prequel to a main series I also did not read. So not only was I trying to review book 2, but these 2 books were a prequel to a series I'd never heard of or read before. So I was really going in blind and praying that I could piece together what was going on. I did a good enough job, I think. Maybe not. But the first 100, no, not 100, maybe the first 50 pages of this, 75 pages of this, was me figuring out what the heck was going on. Because we had a whole new dialect to the point where at the bottom of each page, sometimes there would be a word with an asterisk, and at the bottom, it would explain what that word meant, like as if it was a textbook. And honestly, I was so thankful for it because if not, I would have had no idea what was happening, what was going on. So there was a dialect of the language being used and different just words had different meanings in this compared to if I said a word to you now, that word in this world would mean something totally different. So that was a lot to sort of process and get on board with. But it happened quickly enough that I was able to finish the book and enjoy it. This centers around these two children who are probably like 6 and 7, maybe younger, maybe older, who are brought over from the main kingdom, and they're able to like jump through time because the person who's with them has that power, and that's a very coveted power in this world. And they visit their distant relatives, is what I assume, in this kingdom. And they don't know their father, they don't know their mother. They're sort of abandoned children, but they're very, like, everyone else knows who their mom and dad is. It's just the kids who don't. So they are royal children who run wild all over this other palace. And then there's a young man who came with him who can't time jump, and another man who can time jump. So the one who can't time jump does have other magical abilities. Sort of everyone in the world has their own magical ability. It just depends on what it is and to what degree. So some people can deal with like nature, other people can talk with animals, other people can sing really well. It's like on and on and on. The premise of this story is that the young man with magical powers who can't time jump falls in love with the stable hand. And so it's an LGBTQIA+ novel, which we love to see. It was so sweet watching these characters fall in love. The other thing that is a big like check mark for this book is every main romantic couple is a fated mate, or they've lived multiple lives, and in every life they come together, even if they're torn apart by death or war or whatever. So this first book was those characters falling in love, very sweet. And then the second book, same premise, different two characters, a lesbian couple, and it's sort of trying to talk about the trans experience of having two souls in one body. That's the way it was explained in the second book. The thing I love about these books is that this author, man, they are an artist. Like, that's the only way to describe them, because they composed songs for these books and have links in the books to click. Like, this character is singing this song, but like they'll give you the lyrics on the page. It's not like written like that. It's written as if the story is progressing. And then under the song is the link, and it takes you to YouTube, and you can hear someone singing the song with music. It was crazy. And it was, once I heard the first song, I was set. I was in the world. I was there. I was like, yep, let's go. I can't believe I talked that much about those books. Very surprising. But the last book on my list was my favorite book of the year. Once again, it's a Reedsy Discovery novel, and this is the only novel, to my knowledge, that doesn't come out until April of 2023. My full review for most of these are up on my blog. If it's a Reedsy Discovery book, they are absolutely on my blog. And if it's just a regular book, you can probably find a little snippet of a review on Goodreads, because I don't always do full page reviews for those. But Tolerant by C.J. Sparrow is my favorite book of the year. It was a young adult fantasy novel. It follows a girl who grew up as sort of a slave. She's beaten her whole life into submission and doesn't know her family, is orphaned. Just all she knows are her, like, quote unquote slave masters. That's not what they're called in the novel. That's what I'm calling them. And it gets to the point where, what is it called when someone is kidnapped, falls in love with the person who kidnaps them? That's kind of what happens, because she begins to love the people who are beating her and will do anything in her power to make them happy and to please them, so that, number one, they'll stop hitting her or cutting her or whatever they're doing to her. And that was fascinating. So, and that happened within like 1 or 2 chapters before she runs away, because Once they turn a certain age, they do this test to get placement throughout the kingdom to wherever they can serve best. And if you fail the test, you're killed. So she's already failed the test twice. Her third try is her last try, and she knows she's not going to pass. So she runs away. When she's in the woods, there is a hunter hunting people who have run away from these camps or whatever they are. She ends up taking someone's identity and becomes a servant to the king. Once again, things go a little awry, and she ends up on the run with the prince. This is where the whole thing was very interesting up until this point, but this was really parts of the novel that took me by surprise the most, was watching the relationship between her and the king and seeing where it was going, because I would have not guessed that it was going where it went. They eventually end up sort of in an enemy's kingdom and are trying to save everyone from going to war, but all the while she has magical powers that are coming alive within her, and there's a prophecy about her that's day by day coming to fruition. It was so immersive. It was written so well. The descriptions were gruesome and gory. There's a great setup for a lot of political unrest and a revolutionary war on the horizon. You can sense everyone's motivations, but there's just enough lies and deceit woven into everything that exists that you have no idea what's true, because you're seeing everything through the eyes of this character who grew up loving the people who abused her whole life, who work for the kingdom. So you as the reader are just as in the dark as she is, and you have no idea who's telling the truth. You have no idea who's telling a lie, and you just have to go off of your own instinct and the best information you have and work with that. And gosh, it was such an interesting story. The pacing was great up until the very end, which is sort of my only complaint in this entire novel, is that I kept thinking, oh, it's gonna end here, and then we'd have like 4 more major plot points in 2 chapters, and then it ended. So I think it was rushed a little bit at the end and could have been edited a little bit better there. But other than that, super interesting story. I cannot wait for it to be released. I want a physical copy. I want you guys to get copies. I hope I didn't spoil too much. I tried to keep it as vague as possible. I said pretty much what I said in my review and nothing more. I can't believe like the first book isn't even out yet, which means the second book won't be out for who knows when. It's gonna suck to wait that long, but it was such a good way to end 2022. I literally finished that book on Christmas. So, wow, it was just so good. I was so happy with it. Well, we've been here for probably an hour, depending on how much I can cut out. I guess that makes sense because I read just over 50 books. And if I took a minute for each book, that would be just about 60 minutes. So, wow, thank you for being here and letting me chat with you about one of my favorite things in the world, which is books and reading, along with K-pop and dancing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to dive in to 2023. I've already read my first book. It was a complete 5-star read. Out of the park, out of this world, so good. I can't wait to tell you about it in my monthly wrap-up. I'm actually doing a reading vlog for January already, so I'll tell you about it there too. I'll see you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Bye!